here. I just go ahead with the presentation then. I will share my presentation. No. Okay, is it working?
Yeah, you can see it.
Okay, so like Edward said, my presentation will be about the work agency and the role of herders, Mongolian herders children in work, in the reproduction of their community. So my research was based on a multi-sited ethnography in Baihongga Provincial Center. This is like in the southern central province of Mongolia. And then my nuclear site was in the provincial center at the school and at the dormitory of one school. And then I did visits with some of my research participants in 4 different towns. They call SOMPs, Mongolian. If you see the map on the right-hand side, so 2 towns in the north and then 2 towns in the southern part of the province. Now, most of the research on education development in Mongolia focus. My PhD project have explored the question of how does the convergence between pastoralism, formal education, and ICT shape children of Mongolian herders' relationship to their different socio-ecologies and future aspirations. So now we go back to this slide. Most of the research on education development in Mongolia focus on adults' educational space and interests. So school curriculum, classroom, teachers. However, as Levison and Holland argue, when we shift the center of our inquiry to children and youth as learners and treat education as the construct that goes beyond the schooling experience and includes other forms of learning, we can engage with diverse knowledges that shape youth as the educated persons. And I try to operationalize this relational approach by asking my research participants to map out the spatiality and temporality of learning in their life course. And this allows me to identify their different places of education. And for my research participants who were between 15 and 16 years old, and are children of Mongolian herders, and I cannot move my slide. Besides school, in the semi-urban and urban centers, the other important place of education is Mongolia countryside. Sorry, I cannot move my slide for some reason.
Is it not working, Chi? Yeah, there it is.
Yeah, that's it. There we go. Now Mongolia has a history of accommodating the seasonal mobilities of its herders. During the socialist years, as education became mandatory, the government integrated the needs of herders into the operation of the education system by making spaces in school schedules and being flexible with the attendance in schools. And this allowed the herders' children to continue participating in herding practices as members of their families and their communities. And during this time, school breaks were designed to coincide with herder seasonal activities such as seasonal movements to new pastures, caretaking of newborn animals in the spring, collecting wools, cashmeres. And so the school years actually sync with the temporal relationality observed by herders. And this approach meant that formal schooling it's not a force that completely alienate herders' children from herding, but it actually enable a rural-urban continuum through which herders' children and their families could travel back and forth between the urban, semi-urban center and the countryside. And this practice and philosophy is still being observed today to a certain extent. And so in my slide, you see that the first circle is the seasonal temporality, and then the inner circle where there are red red indicators are the periods where the herders' children are spending time with their family in the countryside. And so why these children are only embedded in the herder way of life during the school holidays, when they are at home, they are really immediately absorbed into the intensive work with herding practices and knowledge. And it is through this intensive participation in the everyday practice of in the countryside that these children and youth gain knowledge about living and working with herds, natural environment, social network that sustain the Mongolian pastoralism. And in this presentation, I explore how the structure and practices of learning in the Mongolian countryside enable herders' children to maintain their participation in the herder community of practice, in spite of their frequent and extensive absence in the countryside. So for my research, I use a central kind of theory for my research, or the way that I look at learning in the of Mongolian herder children is through the lens of community practice. This is a theoretical concept from Lava and Wenger, who said that they use it to refer to a social community in which learning takes place. And they argue that learning involves the construction of identities, which is based on long-term living relations of people to their place and their participation in a community. And they say they propose that to decipher the process of community reproduction and production, we should look at 4 components, which is the membership to the community, the discourse and practices in the community. My research only deals with the practice, and the motivation to participate in the social practice in the community, as well as the part of it will be the continuity and displacement of knowledge. So during the holidays, my research participants come home to the countryside where they live in this form of communal living, which is called hotel in Mongolian. So this is several families living in close proximity in order to provide support for each other. And communal living allows herders' children to participate in everyday knowledge construction in the hotel. And according to the literature, aside from the 35 years of collectivization period when hotel was abolished under the Mongolian socialist industrialization of herding, this structure remains the most well-suited for Mongolia's pastoral way of life because it creates an important social environment for the exchange of knowledge, experiences, and cultural values that are prerequisite for the reproduction of future herders. So this is a mapping. Now, the composition of a hotel are diverse and change with each season. And this is the mapping of a research participant communal living structures. She's from the northern part of the province. And in her mapping, the circles indicate hotel members. And her hotel consisted of only extended family members, aunts, uncle, in-laws, and grandparents. And this is the most common, but there were also research participants whose hotels consist of parents' friends, so not family members. And in this map, you also see the triangles. So it's a social network mapping. The triangles with a dot. And these triangles indicate what is called Sakatel members. They're like neighbors who live further away and who do not share resources and responsibility as intimately as the hotel members do. Relationship between hotel members have been historically stronger than those between Sakatel members. I observed this difference in relational strength between these two forms of social organization during my stay in the Gobi with a research participant. Whereas members of the same hotel cooperated on a daily basis on a wide range of activities, members of Sakatel cooperated only on occasions that require more labor or people with certain skills that a given household or hotel might have. And these include seasonal moves, felt making, shearing of sheep, combing goats for cashmere, castration of calves. And these are the these opportunities for cooperation created occasional spaces for learning between Sakatel members. And like many other herders' household, the composition of this RP, of this research participant hotel and Sakatel changes with their seasonal mobility. The gear symbol indicate hotel members who always move together while the others only join for a certain season. And most family members have 4 different places, one for a season, and some have only 2 winter and summer places. The fluidity of this social structure is significant because they provide herders' children with a form of learning that is relational to diverse time, space, and people. Okay. So within the community of practice framework, Laffinger and Wenger proposed the term legitimate peripheral participation to define learning as an evolving form of membership where identity, knowing, and social memberships intertwine. And this term highlights 2 aspects of the process, through which newcomers move from partial participation to full participation in a community of practice. The legitimacy of participation, which refers to the power relation that shape access and membership of newcomer to community, and the peripherality of participation, which refers to the kinds of activity and kinds of activities and resources that are accessible to newcomers, and how these also changes over the course of development of development cycle of the learners. So during early childhood, herders' children participation involves more observing and imitating in forms of play, for example, of tasks that are performed by older members of the hotel. And as children acquire more skills, they begin to contribute to the productivity of the family and the community, but the demands of their work are naturally less intensive than the adults, older members of the community. Young children, often boys, accompany older males, grandfathers, fathers, brothers, uncle in herding activities at an early age. Riding on horseback, backs, and motorcycles, they learn firsthand knowledge of how to herd animals through different landscapes, how to read signs of nature and the location of natural and social resources. Similarly, in a home, they are also expected to help their mothers. The knowledge of how to collect and convert raw materials, milk, dung, wool, cashmere, hides, and plants for household utilization or trading is obtained through experiential learning as part of the children's work around the gear, the hotel, and the Sakatel. Okay, so now I use the next few minutes to demonstrate in detail how this concept helps us to understand how herders' children learn to tame horses. And I hope the video works. So this video captures the beginning of a training session in which male members of research participant cocktail work together to tame a young horse. There are 2 learners in this video. The research participant's 12-year-old brother, the one on the horse at the periphery at the activity, is just riding on the outside of kind of what's happening here. And a 22-year-old cousin of the research participant, the one on the horse who is closer to the camera and actively involved in the capturing of the horse. Breaking in horses by riding them is often done by teenager boys because their bodies are lighter than those of adult men. Therefore, as learner, the 12-year-old boy participation was an essential component of this practice. And the breaking in of this horse started with the group's effort to catch the selected horse, but he was not involved at that stage. Instead, he was watching the whole process as he herded the other horses nearby. I will skip one thing. So his 22-year-old cousin and the brother of his uncle and his uncle, these are the adults that you see, were working together to kind of control and calm down the horses through specific techniques, which I will go into now. And it is only until the horse was calmer that the 12-year-old's training and work began. And so why the brother of his uncle tied the girdle on his horse, the 12-year-old boy took the long lasso from his uncle, moved closer to his uncle's brother in order to follow his movements, which was matching with those of the horse. And once the girdle in place, then the older man put the saddle on the horse and then helped him to mount the horse by pushing his body against the horse, who was still resisting being handled. It's only once the 12-year-old had a good grip on the rein and found balance on the saddle that the older man let go and shoo the horse away. It is in this first instant, in the first instant, the horse buckled and tried to bolt, but the boys were able to get it under control and drove away. And his job at this stage, the 12-year-old boy, was to ride the horse until it became unable to fight back due to exhaustion, which is a breaking in technique used by Mongolian herders. So the video that only show the beginning of this process, but it shows that the participation was different between the 22 years old and the 12 years old, and that their place in the development cycle of the herder community of practice reflects their physical strength, skills, and experience in this practice. While the teenage boy lightweight and age deterred his participation in certain components of the breaking in process, these criteria also make young learners an essential part of the herding practice. And in showing you this example, I demonstrate the interdependency embedded in the structure of the cocktail that allow herders, children to access other experienced horsemen who help them to move towards the productive participation in their community, and the intergenerational learning that took place between younger and older members in the cocktail. Similar to learning in the agricultural communities, younger children in the cocktail first learn the discrete aspect, what cats call syndicates call the discrete aspect of production through doing, watching, and receiving on-the-job training without mastering the interrelationship and complexity of the process. However, as documented in the photo essay of my research participants, by the age of 15 and 16, herder children are knowledgeable on they have knowledge on the relationalities between the different components of a given practice and the underlying relationality of the practice. And I show this in these two photo essays. So on the right, this research participant underlined that sustained is the reason why many herders continue to bring their herds to distant pasture. And this rationality, this thinking, this philosophy has been at the heart of Mongolian herders resistant to modern husbandry sedentary approaches. And another RP, the one with the photo on the left, in her photo and in her caption, she showed that she knew that goat combing would take place In May, in preparation for the arrival of dealers who would come to their town centers at this time to buy raw cashmere from the herders. And then sheep shearing would take place in July so that herders would have starting material to make felt in the autumn, which is used for winter covering of their gears and mattresses. And my presentation is too long, so I skip a little bit. There's also intra-generational learning. And intra-generational learning, there's co-learning going on between young people because they are kind of in the similar form of participation at a similar stage in their development circles, a cycle in the community. Now I just want to talk about the gender aspect of the household responsibilities. So I asked my research participants to map out the type of work that they do during their school holidays. And so there are gender norms, as you can see. The green one are the male research, so the boys, the male research participants, and then the orange one is the female research participants. And so like most of the agrarian culture, the females are responsible for work around the home, so house chores. However, in the Mongolian situation case, practicality of daily life takes precedence. So for example, so personal circumstances of the family and of at the time or at the moment or in the long term kind of make this gender division porous. And if you look at the blue arrow that I indicated, this boy did a lot of household chores that usually meant for girls, and it is because only he and his 7-year-old brother live at home. They had no girls, so he had to help out. And similarly with the girl, with the situation with the girl, the orange, the blue circle that I circle, she was the eldest of 2 female teenagers in her household, and her brothers were 7 years old, so she was responsible for watering and watching the herds at the pasture. So I now reached 21 minutes, so I just talk very quickly. So even though most of my research participants conform and kind of they cooperated and they meet their household responsibility and communal obligations, they also negotiate and rework these kind of responsibilities. For example, one of my research participants, whenever there's like division of work, she said, I do herding, because with herding, she's able to meet friends, meet relatives when she's out there. Also, herding means that you can access the terrains at a higher level. This allows you to connect signals in these remote places, and you can connect with your friends and your family members there. And whenever she had to do house chores, then she would rework it by combining house chores with watching TV, playing with mobile phones. And sometimes this gets her in troubles too. But most of the time, she also willingly and voluntarily take up responsibilities and obligations because to maintain relationships with her family members and her cartel members. So, and I signal at the communal obligations. So in the cartel in the kind of cartel and sakatel, herders' children are also help out during this occasional communal work. And one of these occasions is the seasonal movement, where they not only help each other to dismantle and set up theirs, but they also help fellow herders who travel through their space with food and tea. And this is, again, part of the way that herders children learn how to, the interdependency that is embedded in the Mongolian herders' way of life. And then I go to my last, slide. And I just wanted to say here that I was very concerned that in this map, you see that this is where I mapped the mobility trajectory of a research participant. And if you look at the primary, lower secondary, and upper secondary, she spent all of this time in semi-urban and urban centers away from her family, either with relatives or in dormitories. So I was very concerned with the de-skilling aspect of her education of this, that due to this extended periods of being away from home. And so I asked her mother if she was concerned that her son and her daughter wouldn't be able to herd or know how to herd, having lived away for so long. And her mother was laughing at me and said, well, I think it takes a little bit of time, but they can relearn it because they know how to live and do things in the countryside. So I stop it there because I'm already 5 minutes over time. But I hope that this presentation helps to kind of highlight the importance of household responsibilities and communal obligations, so work that children do in the reproduction of a community, which is in this case the Mongolian herders community of practice. Thank you.
Chi, did you maybe want to just before I let Michael do the moderation of the Q&A, just want to introduce the 2 questions that you prepared,
Oh, yeah.
which people can. And I will also put them in the chat later in the different groups, but just maybe you can just introduce them briefly, and then we can move on to the Q&A.
Yes.